Welcome to EDU World Space.
Type 1 and Type 2 errors refer to when we incorrectly state the results of a hypothesis test. A Type 1 error is a false positive, or in other words, when we incorrectly reject the null hypothesis. A Type 2 error is a false negative, or when we incorrectly fail to reject the null hypothesis. So this would be the Type 2 errors definition. Now, when we do a hypothesis test, we'll say something along the lines of we are 95% confident in the results, and that would be our alpha level. This means that if we get a p-value of, for example, 3% or 0.03, then in this case we would want to reject the null hypothesis because our p-value tells us the probability that our null hypothesis was correct. Since it's a very low chance of having a correct null hypothesis, we would reject it in this situation. Now, the higher that we make this 95%, if we had said 99% instead, we are going to have a lower chance of incorrectly rejecting the null hypothesis because then we would have to say p equals something less than 1% in order to reject. So we would be very sure that the null hypothesis is wrong before we would reject in this situation. That's one way to reduce type 1 errors. However, that will actually increase the chance of getting a type 2 error because then let's say that we ended up with p equals 2%. In this case, even though it's very unlikely that the null hypothesis is correct, we would still fail to reject the null hypothesis because we were looking for a cutoff of 1% and we got 2%. Whereas if we had made our cutoff at 95%, 2% would have been good enough. So in this situation, when we increase our percent cutoff, then it makes it more likely to get a false negative. In other words, the relationship between type 1 and type 2 errors is that they are inversely related because when one increases, the other will decrease.